Understood exactly what he was saying. And I ain't mad at him, because he was telling the truth. You know, there are certain fundamental truths that need to be comprehended. I'll repeat some of this too, when we start filming for the family. But the timing is important. I've been talking lately with a few brothers and sisters from around the country concerning the ongoing issue with the consular courts, etc., which I know you're all familiar with. And it's one of the things that we need to address when we turn this phone down. Mama called me. Now, how many of you have a woman called Rebecca book? Right. All right. Now, this is what I actually didn't have a woman called Rebecca.
I think I do, but I'm not sure. I know it's bad, I've seen it, I might have just not got it.
This is the pre-edited edition.
Testing 1, 2.
Right, right. And I'm gonna borrow from it, but I want to make a point.
Is that on the RV Bay?
Yeah. You'll be getting them from her in due time. It's just that we're so busy doing multiple things that a lot of things we need to do aren't getting done. It's only because things are bigger.
Testing 1, 2.
So what I wanted to do, I stopped at Staples and got some copies to share with you all of the speech and orations of John Borg Daniel. It says, and save one for sister.
Thank you.
Because though it's taken casually, the point that I'm making is that things can be exposed to people and they still don't see what they're looking at. You know, when they're locked into certain concepts or misconceptions.
Thank you.
You all already know this stuff, but we're going to do it anyway. Now, this is orations and speeches. Now, this particular compilation, the printout was done in about 1911, although the speeches in references is actually in the 1890s, somewhere around there, 1899, something like that. This is when a guy from England who is a U.S. citizen, and they would call them American citizens, which is a false statement. And this goes back to the argument about Trump making fun of Elizabeth Warren, you know, alleging to be Native American, you know, and this is because they've been trading places with us for quite some generations, you know. And a lot of the implication of the insult was because of a lot of our families, you know, that was in the Powhatani Confederation in the South, when they got us by gunpoint and ran our families off the land. They called it the Trail of Tears. You know, but one of the things that you see is that when they tell them the history, they will usually only show amalgamated indigenous peoples, but not the Aboriginal people, the real Anyanguia. You know, so many of you in my family and many of you are on Yamwea, right, or what they call Cherokee, right? And we know that Americans are really the copper complexion people. You know, Canaanite, Moabite descent that were here for thousands of years. We didn't arrive on those ships, you know. But the reconstructed history feeds to that, and the Pocahontas story feeds to the reconstruction of history. You know, so I want to make some points about the burial. You know, semantic nomenclature and how it's used, but at the same time, emphasize the importance of us to recognize the matriarchal principles of the Asiatic African nation operations, you know, prior to European colonial cultivation and intrusion upon the land and upon the peoples, much of which we've adopted, and which is why has a lot to do with the difficulty people have in, you know, going back to culture, or turning back in their minds and in their activities to the ancient Asiatic African cultures, thinking that they're, in collecting the data, that they're therefore harmonic, you know, with our ancient mothers and fathers. And then logically, the result often is that it's rhetorical with no substance, you know, with the people. But I want to show you a few things that are very interesting to demonstrate how the burial was made, right? Now, you can help me since you always have to listen.
Okay, I'll try. No, okay.
Yes. Now I know you've heard these titles before. However, I have the dictionaries back there too. And so we're going to ask you to participate to some degree and help us share with the family, the listeners that will be listening from around the country, and a lot of people who are listening, you know, off the land, with their concepts. Because the timing, nothing occurs by accident. And the timing is interesting because of the multiple attacks that the Europeans in their civil strife is making with Donald Trump, who's the CEO of the corporation, which is bankrupt, you know. And the issue of them, from the issue of them playing the game of disconnect with Barack Obama relative to nationality, relative to citizenship, which in a political realm relates to nationality, but is not legally the same thing, but generally relates to. So when someone's talking citizen, you're already talking nationality. Now, upon a political challenge for a benefit or resource, then the nation must be named in order to enforce the law or to claim a right or to claim a protection or security by obligation or trust of some said particular government persons relative to that right pre-established. And you see them playing around with this area quite often in these last few years, you know, starting with Barack Obama. And the interesting thing was, by them starting to do that, to dismiss him, they were actually exposing themselves. But at the same time, the interesting thing is whether or not many of the people recognize it themselves, whether they're able to see through the veil. You know what I mean? Yes?
It's a thought just crossed my mind when you said that. And that is that the timing of them selecting him as their
CEO.
CEO
Yeah,
was set up so that it could look more like an incompetent, one of, you know, what they call us,
Yes.
Negro, black, whatever they want to call
by
it.
attacking him,
As opposed to the fact that it was because they're attacking the fact that the ship was sinking.
yes, exactly.
They put him on the tail end when they knew everything was going down.
Yeah, exactly, because that was really the plan, you know, except that, I think, on reflection, I think, the responses from, say, the Manchurian Masons and some of the P2 Masons of the bishopric countering kind of messed that plan up, whereas they could still, you know, smear his character and everything, and then blame the fall on him. It kind of messed that up and sent it to this next administration. You know what I mean? And then plus, because he's a constitutional lawyer and he's Kenyan and he's quite up on history. You know, he wasn't a Negroite, he was a national. Because you already know, everyone knows that a person that's branded black could never be president.
Never.
Because the black tag indicates Christian property. So a man whose property cannot administer national affairs, which is logical. You know, but they know that many of the people don't know that it's a brand, they think it's an identity. You ready?
Brother Taj, I was looking for Pocohontas and.
Oh, get the mic, cause we wanna get used to that
Hold
already.
on, yeah.
So it might be valuable for everyone to hear.
You found it?
Okay, no, I was looking on edamonline.com for potent test. I'm looking at law dictionary for it, but it was I was trying to find an etymology on it, even though I can see potent
Most potent person.
is in it. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like
Yeah.
it's
Oh, yeah.
potent in it. So,
Yeah,
but that was just it. And I'm going to see if it's in the law dictionary. But that's what
Yeah.
I was going to ask.
and as you already knew, in the book with the correlations,
Yes.
which are not accidental,
Right.
all right?
If that might, I don't know if it's his deep voice or if it's, you know, but if that mic louder.
Switch mics?
No, it's fine.
No, I need to hear you.
You can't hear me?
Oh,
I want
can
to
I-
see which one is louder.
Oh.
Can I say this too?
This is quite loud.
Before we get started?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's actually a little mixer that you can hook up by rolling, it's like 99 notes, and you can actually hook your phone through it, and so that you can actually have whatever Brother Todd is saying to come through there without us having to, you know, use the speakers, so to speak.
Oh,
So
really?
just, yeah. I feel really-
I just
Peanut
want
butter
to
sandwiches.
Let's see. Say,
Peanut butter sandwiches. Peanut butter sandwiches. Cool.
you hear it?
Hey.
It's you, it's your people. I'm saying, man.
Yeah.
You. Oh, well.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Anywho, let me get this up. I'm still within my.
Because remember, they do most of the things in the patriarchal form to support the priesthood. So just look at potentate.
Yeah, that's what she found in the Black's Law 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, you know, people who don't know the culture here at the North, on the Americas, you know, when they look at what they call the derby hat, or the derby hat, they be thinking is like just Europeans. No, it's all up and down North, Central, and South America, particularly with the Amaros to the south, when you're dealing with Chile, Peru, etc. You know, so people's images of, even when they look at the clothing and think that a lot of the stuff that the European has is European clothing for the Romans, it's not true. Your stuff. You know, so our concepts about ourselves are wrong on many fronts. You know, because Europeans have projected local imagery on a broad scale to give stereotype images. You know, so when people see, say people, Asiatics with a derby hat or something like that, they'd be thinking that that's European. It's not. You know, as an example. Let me know when you're ready.
I can't put the whole text. If I just put a woman called Rebecca, you want me to put divisions, what is it? Divisions of the Moorish nations?
Yes, Mataoaka. A woman called Rebecca. Go ahead, give her the cover, let her read it. Yes.
I mean, how much of it did you want me? Okay.
Whatever you feel.
Divisions in the Moorish nation,
Because you need to, people need to be aware, people need to be aware where a lot of the schism that they experience today has part of its origin, although it goes beyond that. We're talking about some of the things that are most contemporary, you know, that the people suffer. And a lot of it has to do with both a karmic response and a lack of knowledge about the karmic response in relationship to Empress Mataoaka. You know what I mean?
Okay, we're gonna get ready to get started. Just the housekeeping. If you have a cell phone, please put it on vibrate or mute or turn it off so that the only phone that goes off will be probably Grand Sheep's. But please mute your phone. And I'm going to introduce him, and I will, let us put our hands together and the people out there, okay? All right.
Wow.
That's fine.
Islam, welcome to House.
I want to welcome you to the House of Reawakening Minds. And once again, this is our bonus Friday, second Friday, and our instructor for the civics class is none other than Grand Sheik Taj Tarik Bey.
What I want to share with you today is an extract from speeches by John Warwick Daniel. But what I want to do is to get you to pay attention to details to show you how history slips through, true history slips through, and a lot of people, because they don't know how to dig, how to read, how to be a detective in literature, i.e. how to etymologically analyze an instrument, etc., will miss it. But what I wanted to show you and share with you is some notes that I've had for years and that I've shared with my children, but I want to share with you relative to Mataoaka to put her into more proper perspective, particularly for the heirs of the estates, many of whom don't know their heirs to the estate. The other deal is, Sister Sai was telling me, you want to share that with me too, if you got a minute?
Sure.
About the clock?
Oh.
Mike, let's get the mic.
This is very important. I'd rather have her come here.
Oh, all right. She can come up there.
You know, we were just talking, and in general, and what she was sharing was just simply right on time with what we had already prepared, myself and Dr. Naila, for tonight. Share with the people, please.
Islam.
Islam.
I am Silus. Tia Silus is what I'm known as. It's an honor to be here with each of you tonight, both here and online. I'm visiting the States from Honduras, and I was sharing with Taj Tarik Bey that in Honduras there is a clock in Comayagua. Comayagua was originally the capital of Honduras. And in Comayagua, there is this beautiful clock, and this clock is over 900 years old. It came from Alhambra, Granada, Spain, during the time that the Moors did reign. Interestingly enough, it's in Honduras. So in our conversations today, I said, Brother Taj Tarik, the clock not only dates back to the Moorish times, but the clock is also part of archaeology that also brings us into the region way before the region was settled. And that's very important. Not only is it important that it is a clock, but it actually dates the presence of the Moors.
Thank you, sis. Now, one of the things that in the ongoing nature of our conversation, because it didn't, I was glad to hear it because I was going to talk about Mataoaka today. But I mean, it's like, well, we know this because we know that's Older Mexican, that's Central Mexican. But the response that many people have is like, almost like in their minds, according to how they've been trained by Europeans, that the clock is out of place. The clock is not out of place, it's in another part of Moroccan Empire. Do you understand? I think a lot of times, because people are trained with the they came from somewhere else mentality, which is the psychological disconnect that has been promoted under unum sanctum and doctrine of discovery policies that disconnect the people from the land, that many of the descendants of the Moors feel disconnected from the land and are always first thinking about that someone brought them here. That's a training like they've done rats, like they train little rats. And then they pass it to the next generation. And so you see a lot of the descendants of the Moors, readily adopt the Negro black brand systems as an identity, and the good ship Jesus that they allegedly were brought here on like sardines, and that's how they operate. And that when they see or hear of any vestige of their bloodline history on the land, they always attach it to a psychology of transference from another place on the planet. You get the point. When in fact, they are the people of the land. Islam, give her the mic too. Come on up.
I wanted to share this directly so that everyone has a source. The website is HondurasCulturePolitics.blogspot.com. Interesting. Honduras Culture Politics, one word, .blogspot.com. And it's the oldest clock in the Americas.
That should tell you something right
Oldest clock in the Americas.
And then, let's slow down again. Then they talk about the oldest clock in North America with who's that, built that one?
Yeah, where was it?
What's the
site
location again?
Chief Justice Muali, whose fez is there in Washington's monument. His fez is there, and Muali's fez is there, and they rewrite him in history as Ben Banneker.
The website is Honduras Culture Politics, all one word, .blogspot.com. And it's on the oldest clock in the Americas to ring in the new year. The third paragraph says, why Comayagua? The clock mechanism in the cathedral is said to be the oldest clock in the Americas. Photos of the mechanism show it uses a system of iron weights to power the escapement. While the local history says the clock was built around 1100 AD. Remember, local history is usually oral tradition. But though some sources say 1374 AD. This kind of clock came into use in the 13th and 14th centuries in Europe. The clock is said to have been originally installed in the Alhambra Islamic capital in Granada, Spain.
So when the Moors fell, they were able to come into the Western Hemisphere, you see. This is why, like say for instance, when people are talking about American history and they're talking about the enslavement of the Asiatics here called blacks and Negroes, and don't tell that history, another scholar knows that that's a cointelperative.
Indeed.
Right.
Because the archaeological history don't support that black game nor that diaspora. Although that's promoted, the archaeological history does not support it. The real history and the Aboriginal people, when you talk to the people of the land, they give you a totally different history, you know. And thank you for that, sister, you know. But again, for those who know, you know, it's not surprising. It's surprising to the degree that you have people that are really reading and studying and researching. But the fact of it is not surprising when you know the history, because you know that's Central Africa, Olmec. You know, so you already know that they're Moors. So it's no secret. It's no secret to the world. It's only seemed to be a secret to people who are the heirs that insist because of training, not because their heart is, you know, black. They insist on training because they actually, in their heart, believe that human beings are crayons, even though the rest of the world looks at them like as boys and girls, you know, because they have that mentality of a minor, and they refuse to release that because that's sort of like a mental security blanket. It's also an escape from responsibility, you know, in real world administrative government. But anyway, so I wanted to share with you some of the notes taken from the speeches of John Warwick and show you the obvious and what many people will overlook or dismiss, not recognizing. The fullness of the text can be read in your spare time, but I want anyone to take a paragraph from the beginning and we'll share with the audience, etc. And if you will, you know, because we're doing this, actually sharing this for the children of the listeners to Dr. Naila's website, because remember, many of our children are influenced with the cute little cartoon stories of Pocahontas, which is really designed to take her out of her empress status and to put her in this kind of setting of a cute little, what they're calling Native American, which is a phrase they made up in the 1800s, which is not who we are, and it's not the people. They made that up for people who agree to be that, to become under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Indian Affairs so they could claim jurisdiction over people on the lands, etc. But anyway, would you come up and do the first page or so, and then next someone else can come? Yes.
Go ahead.
No.
Mr. President, I desire to engage the attention of the Senate for a few moments that I may discharge a task of courtesy and of duty that has been too long, though unavoidably delayed. Some time since I received a letter from Henry S. Welcome, Esquire, an American citizen, a native of Indiana, now residing in England near London, in which he requested me to present to the Senate in his behalf an oil-painted portrait of the Indian princess Pocahontas, whose name is romantically connected with our early history and whose gentle character has preserved it in sweet memory. Mr. Welcome is a public-spirited citizen who has carried American enterprise to the motherland, where he is a distinguished and successful chemist and druggist. He was one of the organizers of the American Society in London and was its president for several years. And generally, he is the chairman of the committee, which has charge of the Thanksgiving Day dinner and the 4th of July celebration participated in by the American residents of that great metropolis. Well known and respected in both countries, he is a generous patron of art, science, and letters. And he is a patriot, alive to all that interests his native land, his enthusiasm being such that he keeps the stars and stripes continually flying over his office and factory. He has taken deep interest in our early history and in the fate of the Indian race. A notable instance of his gracious disposition has been shown in the removal, through his agency and influence, of the Mataoaka Indians from British Columbia into the confines of the United States, where, as he thought, they could find more congenial laws and associations. The picture of Pocohontas is a fine copy of a painting which hangs in Boston Hall in Norfolk, England, the former seat of the Rolfe family. The original is from the brush of De Pass, an eminent artist of the 16th and early part of the 17th century. Upon the canvas of the original are painted these words: Mataoaka, Rebecca, Philippontis Princess, Powhatan in Virginia. On the space below, Mataoaka, alias Rebecca, daughter of the mighty prince Powhatan, emperor of Atanao, Kamak of Virginia, a Christian, converted and married to the worshipful Mr. Thomas Rolfe, age 21, 1616.
Now, the Empress, who is the daughter and heir to Hanasolokok, actually, is her dad, her father, matriarch, potentess, empress, and a converso. So you can see the problem that many of the Asiatics had historically with Mataoaka, because many of them looked at her as a traitor for marrying John Rolfe. And of course, you know that marriage, they took her to Gravesend, England, where they assassinated her. You know, they threw her overboard, really. Gravesend, England, and then with her son, they used her son as the entry point to set up Jamestown, Virginia. This the first strong, permanent stronghold for the Romans in the North Gate. And of course, in spite of treaties, etc., which we have in place, they continued to break the treaties, etc., and begin to exterminate the heirs of the estate and create the brand systems, calling our people Native American, Indians, Negroes, colored, etc., all of which we're not. I also, I want someone else to come read the following pages, and I would have for you to, sis, if you would please, to read the last page when comes up. And prefer the sisters, not that we're rejecting the brothers, because that feminine energy is representative of the restoration of the matriarchy. Because when they are talking about Mataoaka, they do not project the energy of the potentess nor of the matriarchy. For thereafter, even though they murdered her and rewrote the history and called her Rebecca and Pocahontas, both of which she's not. You know, that shows you how the history is buried. You know, so in history, to some, she will be known as a woman called Rebecca, and in some in history, she'll be known, most in history, as Pocahontas. And all the scholars know that she's Mataoaka. Potentess of the Powhatan Confederation of the North Gate in the southern region, daughter and heiress of Hanasonokuk of the Powhatan Confederation, and much of the problems that we have thereafter with many of our people is with the women delivering their children to the local bishopric under the converso operations. And of course, most of the people today thinking that they're Constantinians under the disguise of Christianity, when in fact they're really Muslims who have been defeated. And this is again because many of our people, right, wrong, or indifferent, not making a judgment, we're just setting the record true, are conversos. And have forgotten both what that means and how it is reflected upon by other Asiatics and Africans around the world. And so most Asiatics and Africans around the world, when they look at the Moors who don't recognize their own bloodline in the North Gate, who call themselves black, they know the rest of the world talks of us as conversos. And the conversos are essentially generally referred to as traitors, which is so a lot of times when our people get less than the most honorable treatment from other Asiatics and Africans that come to North America, they think because of the training of the Romans that they're looking at skin shade, when the real deal is that the rest of the world looking at those persons as traitors. They're called conversos. And a lot of the problems that we've had in America, they'll say Americas, but understand America is the large continent from the south to the north. It is really one continent. Not to be confused with the canal that was put in Panama. You know, the land is one. You know, and we are the heirs, the direct heirs of the world's largest estate. The other point that I wanted to make in relationship to Sister Syed talking about the oldest clock, you know, because the clock is actually older than they're telling you. And the clock was one of the clocks in the Red House, or what you call Alhambra. And so when you're talking about history or the changing of the power structure on the Earth planet relative to the Constantinians and the ancient Asiatic world, they use 1492 as the axis year. Although it's actually takes place in a series of a few hundred years, in fact, you know, the transfer, they use 1492 as the axis year because that is when the Red House fell. Alhambra fell. And it fell about near midnight, January the 1st. And this is why the Romans modified the calendars and used January the 1st as their new year. It's a fiscal new year because that's when the Alhambra fell. All right, so January the 1st, 1492, near midnight, the Alhambra fell. And so that is used as the fiscal new year for Roman conquest, European colonial operations. So understand that's not the real new year, that's a political new year set for Roman conquest, all right? January 1st. And this is one of the reasons why the Mummers Parade that takes place in Philadelphia is a conjoined tradition, which is the celebration of the fallen Moors. All right, keep that in mind. And keep that in mind the harmonics that it has with Mataoaka. All right? Anyone like to come and read the next page, starting off where sis left off?
I'll read it.
Come on, sis. Appreciate you.
Hi everyone,
Islam.
peace and Islam. I'm Ariel Mfijao. There was a superstition among the Indians that concealed the true name, and Mataoaka was the real Indian name of the princess, though they called her Pocahontas. Within a few years, Mr. President, we will celebrate, and doubtless with fitting honors, the 300th anniversary of the planting of the first durable colony of the English-speaking race in the New World. This occurred at Jamestown in Virginia on the 13th day of May, 1607. They came none too soon. While Cabot had roved the northern seas and claimed the American continent in the name of England in 1497, nothing had been done to effectuate his title, and now more than a century had gone by. Meantime, the Spaniards under Ponce de Leon had possessed themselves of Florida, Cortez had conquered Mexico, Parazio had laid Peru on his feet, and De Soto had passed across the land to the Mississippi. Meantime, also, the French were establishing themselves in Canada, and little scope was left for English enterprise unless they took advantage of the fugitive occasion, as Jefferson afterwards did in acquiring Louisiana. 3 little ships of 20, 40, and 100 tons burden, respectively bearing the names of Discovery, Godspeed and Susan Constant, under the command of Captain Christopher Newport, had sailed down the Thames on the 19th of December, 1606. With the design of renewing the effort which had previously failed to establish a colony at Roanoke in what is now North Carolina. Prayers were said in the churches as they went forth on their perilous enterprise, and the poet Drayton rapped them Bon Voyage in inspiring verses, one of which runs, "You brave heroic minds, worthy your country's name, that honor still pursue, will slaughtering hens, lurk here at home with shame, go and subdue." All right, John Warwick Daniel. They went and they subdued a violent storm. However, Mr. President, drove the ships into the mouth of the Chesapeake River, where they were first touched land at a place which they named Point Comfort. They then proceeded on their way up the James River, and on the 13th day of May, 1607, the first fleet that they came to stay landed at Jamestown. Captain John Smith, knight-errant soldier, sailor, and adventurer, was the leading spirit of this colony, and of it he soon became the president. For 3 years, his courage, wisdom, and mastery of men, he rescued and preserved it from many trials, difficulties, and dangers. To him belongs the name of the founder. While the land was fertile and beautiful, even in its lower shores were covered with flowers of diverse colors and goodly trees, with fish in the streams and the game in the forest, danger lurked in every thicket. The flight of arrows from Indian bows in the tall grass was a salute with which the newcomers were received in the wilderness, of which the great Indian king Powhatan was emperor, having in the tribe 8,000 with 2,400 warriors. A year passed by, and complaints came that little had been accomplished, fewer and hunger had decimated at the colony, and there were disconnects at home. The royal order was to go in search of the South Sea, and so with a small party, John Smith, on a bleak December day in 1607, embarked in a barge up on the Chickahominy River to find it. Ascending to the shallows, he procured a canoe and some Indian guides, and with only 2 companions, he ascended further until he reached and landed at a point in the White Oak Swamps of the White Oak Swamp east of Richmond, to which he gave the name Rosaweek. He did not find the South Sea, but here he did find a band of Indians who captured him. He was taken before their chief. I'm gonna need help with this word. Right here, the name of the chief of Pocahontas. what Taj said. Pocohontas, brother to the Emperor Powhatan, and was thence taken to Werokamoko, the chief place council of Powhatan, in what is now Gloucester County, at a site on the north bank of the York River, not far from Yorktown. Wrapped in a robe of coonskin sat the tall, gaunt, sour old Indian emperor, and Smith, who had slain 2 of his Indian assailants in the fight of the Chickahominy, was condemned to die. 2 stones were brought forth before Powhatan, and Smith was dragged to them, his head forced down, one of them, and clubs were raised to beat out his brains, when lo, an Indian girl of 12 or 13 years of age rushed upon the scene, caught his head in her arms, and laid her own upon him to save him from death. The sour old king relented, and Smith was saved, and the intercessor was Powhatan's favorite daughter, Pocahontas. Many times during the struggles of this little colony on the James did she again attest her generous and gracious character. Once when they were starving, she had suddenly appeared, bearing corn to their relief. And again when they were about to be assailed and massacred, she gave the timely and sufficient note of warning. A few years rolled by. The fortunes of war became changed. In 1612, Pocahontas was taken prisoner by that rover of land and sea, Captain Samuel Argall, who had 3 years before brought the message disposing Smith from command. She was brought disconsolate and weeping captive to Jamestown. There she seemed loving in the eyes of Master John Rolfe, sometimes called Thomas, one of the colonists, and his attachment was reciprocated. But Rolfe was sorely troubled in spirit. The scripture forbade the marrying of strange wives, and their mutable love caused a mighty warfare in his meditations. But most like most colonists, the duty of Christianizing the heathen would seem from his own account to have been the moving impulse to his soul, for he reflected upon the question whether it was not his solemn duty to marry and convert this heathen creature, Pocahontas. Okay. As the historian relates, what most touched and decided him was her desire to be taught and instructed in the knowledge of God, her capabilities of understanding, her aptness and willingness to receive any good impression, and also the spiritual, besides her own incitement, steering me up thereto. And so, according to the true poetic justice of romance, at the age of 18, the lovely Indian maiden was married to John Rolfe in the old church at Jamestown, and she was given the Christian name of Rebecca. 3 years later, Rolfe carried his bride to London, where she was treated as a daughter of a king, and where her arrival created a great sensation. In her native forest, she was dressed in doeskin lined with down from the wood pigeon's breast. Anklets and bracelets of coral were her ornaments, with the white plum, the badge of royalty, floating over her hair. Now she shone in all the splendors of court apparel. She was the first lady of the New World to appear in the home country. She was presented at court by Lady Delaware and most graciously used by King and Queen. The Bishop of London delighted her at her conversion to Christianity, gave a great entertainment in her honor, and for a time Pocahontas was all the fashion in the brilliant revels of the great metropolis. She died suddenly at Gravesend in March 1617 at age of 22, when about to return to Virginia, making, as we are told, a godly end, and being buried in the parish church where her name was carelessly registered as Rebecca Rolfe. The church was afterwards burned, and in its ashes disappeared the earthly relics of Pocahontas. From her marriage with John Rolfe was born one son, Thomas Rolfe, who was brought up in London, but he came to Virginia and was known as Lieutenant Rolfe, commanding at Fort James of the Chickahominy. He married a young lady in England who he brought to the New World, and there he became a gentleman in note and fortune. The only daughter of Lieutenant Rolfe was married to Colonial Robert Bowling, of a family widely connected and much respected in Virginia. As Stiff says in his history, this remnant of the imperial family of Virginia, which long ran in a single person, is now increased and branched out into a very numerous progeny. What is it? Progeny. Amongst the descendants of Pocahontas was the rare genius John Randolph of Roanoke, once representative in Congress, a senator in this body, and a minister of the United States at the court of Russia. I note, Mr. President, that a morning journal in the notice of the presentation of this picture accords to me descent from the Indian princess, but no such honor in mine. The character and worthy services of Pocahontas are fully attested and were appreciated and cherished by the colonists. They were much touched by the love of Pocahontas, who ever once in 4 or 5 days brought food which saved many of their lives. That else for this had starved of hunger, and they called her the dear and blessed Pocahontas. Captain John Smith said of her, as for features, contentness, and expression, she much exceeded any of the rest, and in his letter presenting and commending her to Queen Anne, he declared that.
All right. Next. And don't hesitate. And then when you read through the misinformation and the bias, you know, because they're Christianizing her, etc., and they call us heathens, etc. Understand the Spanish imposition. Good day, sister.
And in his letter presenting and commending her to Queen Anne, he declared that during the time of 2 or 3 years, she, next under God, was still the instrument to preserve this colony from death, famine, and utter confusion, which, if in those days had been dissolved, Virginia might have been as it was at our first arrival to this day. Upon slender threads often hang the momentous events of history. John Fiske, the historian, in his book, Virginia and Her Neighbors, speaks of Pocahontas as one of the noblest and loveliest characters in American history, and asserts that the rescue of Smith by her was an event of real historic importance. Without it, the subsequent relations of the Indians and the English colonists become incomprehensible. And he adds the significant words that, but for her friendly service on more than one occasion, the tiny settlement would probably have perished. The charm of romance will ever hang over the story of Pocahontas, and that flower of the wilderness will ever shed its brightness and its fragrance over the rude, somber, and cruel senses of our people's earliest struggles to get a foothold in the land whose inhabitants are now as the stars of heaven, the leaves of the trees, and the sands of the sea. But far beyond this, it should not be forgotten that she was indeed the guardian spirit of the great founder Captain John Smith and his feeble company. And who knows but for her what had been the New World's destiny. It is meet that her portrait should hang here in remembrance of her lovely character and her pious deeds, and the myriads that gaze upon it wondering whence came the gentle spirit that dwelt in the savage breast will be minded also that all men are brethren, and that even in the dark shadows of the forest primeval, there may shine a light from heaven, and there be found a spark of that immortal fire, by angels shared, by Allah given, to lift from earth our low desire. I present this portrait to the Senate, Mr. President, in the name of Mr. Henry S. Welcome, an American citizen residing in London.
Now, they called her heathen on one hand, but it was her knowledge, her culture, her heart, her science, knowledge of the land that saved them from death. Well, she's the heathen. Get the point? But I want you to notice the poem that they read before the Senate of the United States, and you can see that Mataoaka, that they call Indian, was Muslim. The Powhatan Confederation is Moors. And how many people read history and read past things like that don't even pick it up? You see the point? And so, when a lot of these people are talking about the people of the land, they're talking about everybody else but themselves. And their whole concepts are molded by European misrepresentation, and they bury her twice, from Mataoaka to Pocahontas to Rebecca. And she's Christianized, when in fact she's Muslim. In other words, she's a converso. And so they bury her triple time, 5 times, and the descendants think they black, and Negro and Indian, none of which they are, and are totally disconnected from the land, do not recognize the matriarchal principles on this land, and don't recognize they're on their own land. And they're looking at the European as the American, and then looking at us as Native Americans. Europeans are not Americans, they're Europeans. They ain't white people, they're Europeans. They're occupying us and occupying our land, altering the history. Are we clear? But on the interim, rather than read this to you, we stopped down, Staples copied this, and just to let you see why the earlier books are not available to your children in schools, because they reveal too much, if you get the point. However, scholars already know this stuff in general, But the interesting thing I find as I travel and deal with different people, it is some of the persons are claimed to be scholars on our side of the fence back then that are the first to attack the fact that these people are really Moors. And that Islam been here for thousands of years on this side, So I wanted to show that to you, and the respect and reverence that the Europeans have for Mataoaka, even though publicly they will not call her by her name, the same way they modified Yahushua, they will never call him by his proper name, Yahushua, and they made houses and they'll call him Jesus, but they will never call him by his name that he did his work in, or that his mother and his father named him. Why? Because it'll tie him back to the culture and tie these people here to the north, who also have hair like lamb's wool, skin like burnished brass, back to their bloodline. It's part of what is called the disassociation process of the unum sanctum policy, etc., and the doctrine of discovery, which is used to this very day to claim the lands and the states of the Asiatic people of the land. But it is first necessary to disconnect them mentally from the land. It's easier to take it. So when you look at movies and other communication instruments used by the Romans in North America, occupying North America, concerning the history, you see? So instead of telling the truth about Mataoaka, right, who was Muslim, they say that she was Christian. Right? Instead of saying who she is, they'll say that she was Pocahontas. And then Rebecca. You see the point? See the barrier? And she was an empress. And a princess. And a potentess. And this is where they get, in masonry, this is where in masonry they get potentate. So they're taking your places. They've actually traded places with you. And so when our people see these words that are related to this, they're associated with Europeans, Illuminati, Masonry, etc., and also the Great Seal, etc., and it's your stuff. They're trading places with you. But yet, when the children see the images of Mataoaka, if you said to most of these children, Mataoaka, they not only would not relate, they wouldn't even know what you were talking about whatsoever. And you start talking about she was an empress and a potentess, their eyes would get crossed. You talk a little longer, they do like those slot machines, their eyes will start rolling like this. Because they don't know what you're talking about. And yet their parents, following after Rome, will be telling them stories about Pocahontas running around in a loincloth, hugging trees with nature science of the Native Americans, and saving John Smith, excuse me. Get the point? And most of them don't know that the James River was named for King James, particularly for the power of the modification of the books in order to mentally put the people to sleep by teaching the books of the ancient ones in an anthropomorphic format and keeping them there even in their adult stage. And so the Jamestown, Virginia is named after King James, who was appointed to or commissioned to modify the Book of the Dead, etc., from Kentucky and Tennessee, which is Lower Egypt. And of course, the people of the land know that what you call the Grand Canyon is also ancient and more ancient than Hikupta on the other side, which is why you're not allowed to go in that area. Because you will find that we've been here not of thousands of years, millions. You know, so they artfully, skillfully, and successfully reconstructed history, and the heirs of the estate are the strongest believers in that Christianized history, because they think that Christian history means Jesus history, not knowing that Jesus is the password and is really Yeshua, and he's of the same bloodline you are, who was lynched by them. And so the same way they modified his history under the Nicene Council of 325 AD, 781, they modified Mataoaka's history, and they modified yours. And this is why the heirs of the estate are called Negro, Black, Colored, Latino, whatever you call yourself this week, all made up by European Romans who conquered you and reconstructed history. And when you yourself promote the semantic connotative adjective presentments as definitions, you help bury your own children with the power of words. And I wanted to show you, or take the opportunity, particularly since many have been attacking Donald Trump for teasing Elizabeth Warren for faking as Native American, and they're talking racism and everything, you really pay attention to what he was saying, he was telling the truth. Because what he talks about, a lot of Europeans always claim to be the people of the land. They're not the people of the land. I don't care how many generations removed, they're descendants of occupiers, distinguished from the Americans, which is us, who have been, they've been working, and I want to show you some, this is how they write you out of history. That's how we've been written out of history. You see? So when the children get the history, and we're not talking about ancient. We're not talking about ancient. They have no idea about who this is. They have no idea that this is her science and her culture. They have no idea that this is her position in society. What they do know is this, and they think that she's this, and honorably called that. And all this varies the history with words. Are we clear?
Clear.
And we're talking contemporary history. Contemporary, we ain't even getting ancient. So what happens when the little girls grow up? They grow up with the mentality that if you're talking about princesses, stuff like that, you're talking about Europeans. If you're talking about empresses, you're talking about Europeans. If you're talking about potentate and potentates, you're talking about supreme grand commanders in your most high noble societies. And she was a noblewoman. And the only reason why John Smith was living, which they thanked her for, is because she was the daughter of Hanukkuk, emperor. Do you understand what I'm saying? And it's on her word that he lived. And yet, not far after that, then they took our families at gunpoint and ran us off our land out into the west, Oklahoma. As a matter of fact, they use that pattern today in military operations. Like when they're doing what they carried on traditionally in the North, the Romans for the Aboriginal people, say they would draft them and force them into the armies to fight against their own, right? Which they do to this very day. So if someone came up from this area, northeast, they send them southwest. If someone went in the service from the southwest, they'll send them up here to northeast. If someone come into the service in the southeast, they'll send them to the west, northwest, like that. So they're totally disoriented from local area. And that's the same thing they did with the Trail of Tears, but they also do that in the history. And these speeches in the House of the Senate, because remember, this is about the Senate for the United States. All this is about an oil painting that was duplicated of another oil painting, and lightened up, and being hung in the floor of the Senate. So at least they give her the respect to read, an excerpt from a poem from her culture, but then slip up and let people know that she's Muslim. Do you understand? And so when you see the people here that call themselves black, or agree to be black, it's not who they are. They're just going along with the story. And they think they're Christians and they deliver their children to the high priest, not knowing in secret they're really Constantinians, robbing you and hiding behind the name Christianity, and they're burying you and burying your children just like they did the ones before you. And this is a perfect opportunity to use their own literature to show you etymologically. And this is called transference, morphology, etc. But it's also what you call pseudonym nom de guerre. That's how nom de guerre. That is how nom de guerres are used. It's a war name. And yet a person who can't read wouldn't even recognize it. But a person who knows basic scholarship, it sees it immediately. So they continue to project Indian, right? And project Pocahontas and project Native American, all of which are, every last one of those are frauds. And then when you pick it up, then you teach it to your children, you reinforce it with them, and they're totally disconnected from what? Their estate and the matriarchy. See the point? And we're not talking about digging deep into ancient pyramids of the Mexico, you know, because our biggest pyramid here was in Mexico, what they call today Mexico City. The pyramid was so large that when the Constantinians tore it down, they used it to build cities, plural. That's how big that pyramid was. Pyramid of the Sun. Bigger than the pyramids on the east side, you know. And the other interesting thing is, for people around the world who know the culture, who know the truth about the North Gate, you'll see other Asiatics seeking to come to the north, and our people here don't know, always trying to go someplace else. Everybody else trying to come here. Because they know this is the sempiternal culture. And as long as the heirs are asleep, there is almost limited wealth that anyone can get or generate here in the north, as long as they can keep the heirs asleep. And so it is, for some, not necessarily a moral dilemma, excuse me, for them to help keep this black thing going, because they get paid, whether it's a so-called black leader, reverend guys who keep on promoting the civil rights crap instead of the heirship of the people. Instead of constitutions and treaties, they teach belief systems that they know that was formulated by the dark priesthood. They disconnect the land. They lie on Yahshua, say his name was Jesus, and say he was a Christian when in fact he was not. He was Muslim too, of the what you call Yahudi. And also people would refer to as a Jew, which is improper. It is actually a degree of the bishopric. All right, so he was, of the rabbinate. He was an Essene of the rabbinate. And that's a Kabbalistic and Gnostic order of your higher degrees of science, of earth science, which today would be called Moorish science or masonry, etc. So they'll do it in different codes in order to hide it from the masses. But this is why also when you get into the truth of Asiatic culture, they'll usually put a devil tag on it to keep you from looking at it. While you run the world, run the planet with. And as a reminder to you all, and I say this very redundantly when we're here and in other venues, people easily and quickly forget when they see Europeans in different secret societies around the world wearing the Moorish fez, and they get so emotionally charged with whatever secret society is, they don't pay attention that they're wearing a Moorish fez. You know how like you can put things right in front of these people's face and they still don't see it. You know, woman called Rebecca. Yes. Yes. Because thank you, Gabriel. I need your energy just a minute. If you don't mind.
It's wrong.
With your technical skills and ability to technically speak. All right. And you can do a synopsis if you please, too. Now, this is a historical caveat. Can you read that?
The historical caveat. The stories about Pocahontas vary among the indigenous Moors, falsely called Negroes, Indians, Black, etc., and the conquering Europeans. There was anxiety and strong speculation among the Moors about her relationship with Captain John Smith. and with another man named John Rolfe, both Englishmen. Her supposed marriage to John Smith was often put to question. Some say she married Captain John Smith to save his life because of deaths and threats of deaths made on some of the Moorish chieftains and a number of her family members. This was, supposedly, prior to his last capture, but many say this action on her part was to cover up some other unseemly activities. Would you like me to continue, Brother Tyler?
Continue. Until you start.
Oh, okay. Some say that Pocahontas was acting as a compromised agent for the English mercenaries. This was because of her conversion to Christianity and her knowledge of the Albion's intent to remove the Aboriginal indigenous people from the land. She was also suspected of having a clandestine relationship to and with the formerly mentioned John Rolfe. She was known to have informed the colonial mercenary raider when the Moorish regencies were planning an attack or counterattack. She was very useful to the Captain Proctor, John Smith, as he was once before captured by the Moors. Many say that the marriage of Pocahontas to Captain John Smith was staged as a cover, an act emanating from both a secret love as well as for political recognition and accommodation. She is said to actually have been secretly courting the other Englishman named John Rolfe. Rolfe was said to be her favored one of the two. She was, I'm sorry, y'all laugh, I'm sorry, that was funny.
And they won't hurt you.
Yeah, I mean, she may have been playing a little deception game between the two men, but while she may have had a personal gratification plan, so did the English. She was being used by the English to get a foothold in the Moorish dominions of Al-Marak. There was general concern and questions among the people about her, Pocahontas, honor and loyalty. So it was about her honor and loyalty. Such concerns were not often subdued or left unspoken. During the year of 1614 AD, Pocahontas and John Rolfe were married and went to England. She was pregnant at a mature 22 years of age. While in England only a very short time, she gave birth to a son of an Englishman. He was later to receive his political grooming and education in London. He was now an heir to the vast lands in the Moorish Almoravian dominions. After all, the Nicene Creed is patriarchal in character. Women are considered the property of Christian men. Pocahontas served her purpose very well and was used surreptitiously for raising and establishing Roman rulership in the Western world. John Rolfe, now this is underlined, I should have mentioned when the other one was underlined. John Rolfe wanted and was rewarded by the birth of a son, having a Moabitess / Moor as a mother. This already attained goal was certainly a blessing for the Englishman, even if his fatherhood was in question. He and his son were nevertheless legal heirs to a vast estate and to untold wealth by way of direct family and blood by way of the son in relationship to Pocahontas, the royal princess and potentess. And while Pocahontas had produced a son, an heir to her estate, for John Rolfe, her other associate, Captain John Smith, was growing in political strength and power in North America, Almarac. He was the confirmed authority and legal potentate and president of Virginia colony. This constituted a massive and most unthinkable achievement for the Roman colonists. All this, Moorish lands, the wealth, the sovereignty, the inroads into the immense and extensive intercontinental influence and power was deceptively attained by John Rolfe's marriage to the princess, Pocahontas. And to further solidify the foreign colonial grip on Moorish lands, there was Captain John Smith and the Virginia Company. This great military coup was built upon her, Pocahontas' deceitful acts, namely by assisting the enemies of her own people. Now, how is that for romance and intrigue? Many thought that the Princess Pocahontas had married the new Virginia colony praetor and president, John Smith. Meanwhile, on the rapidly changing political and social front, the young and beautiful Pocahontas was regularly honored and flaunted like a prized object of curiosity before the people of England, Albion, by her Roman husband and master, John Rolfe. She was, at least, once presented in the court of King James of England as Lady Rebecca, Princess Powhatan, Empress of Virginia. She was also addressed as and recognized by her noble title of potentess. A potentess is the feminine equivalent of a potentate. A potentate is one with extreme authority, rank, influence, and having sovereign power. She was given high respect and honor, although she was sometimes viewed by the English populace as a mere figure for curiosity. Pocahontas was christened as Lady Rebecca. Okay.
Comment if you feel.
You said comment if I feel?
Yeah.
Oh, you saw it in my face, huh?
Oh, yeah. Good.
One thing that it's talking about is pointing out largely here is the maxim. I'll say the status of the child is determined by the status of the mother. So all this is precedented on her.
Yes.
So without, in me analyzing it, like as if I'm watching someone else, read it, or me having a chance to analyze it, what I'm picking from it is, without the woman, none of this would happen. Not just Pocahontas herself, it's just in concept, period. Like, these men have prosecuted, have pursued with this, like, they dedicated their life to this. So why would something that is inferior to her pursue it so fervently, and we don't have that? That's how I'm looking at it. So that's just what I'm saying with that. And another thing that I see as well, but besides the fact that there's these two brothers here, it's the fact that both of them are Englishmen, and both of their lives depends. Like, without Pocahontas, not just there's this plot to, have her produce a son from our electrical interaction, but yet, not just the son, but in order for us to continue to live and continue to be and continue to breathe and see that growth. So I'm seeing all of that. and it's really about mother, no matter what. But.
Now, do the comparison in the Bible, Rebecca in the Bible.
Okay. Okay. Now, the comparison with Rebecca in the Bible, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, 2 sons. Am I wrong?
Right there, go ahead.
Okay. Death of Lady Rebecca?
Yeah.
Alrighty, I'll continue reading. It is said that Pocahontas, Lady Rebecca, died in a shipwreck not far off the shore of Graves in England. She was said to be addressing some official matters and on her way back to Old Dominion in Mataoaka. The shipwreck occurred, supposedly, sometime in March of the year 1617 AD, Anno Domini. This was only 6 months after her arrival. This coincidental and timely accident was after she went to England and delivered a male child for John Rolfe. Is not the name of the English town Gravesend ironic? Look at the name, Grave, Send, or Graves, N. I'm gonna spell that first one for y'all. Grave was the first one, and sent, like being sent to the grave. And the other one is Graves End, like this is the end. Your grave is the end. So, right. Maybe taking note of this incident as an irony would be an understatement, especially with her death being obviously very suspicious. But then, when courting with an enemy, deception breeds deception, does it not? Talk about intrigue and prevarication. The fact that Pocahontas, Lady Rebecca, died at sea under questionable circumstances may rightfully generate hard questions and suspicions, but who would ever know the true cause or circumstances? It's a lot of question marks and exclamation points. I just want y'all to know it's making me emotional as I'm reading it. Okay, we can certainly see another side of the legendary Pocahontas, Captain John Smith and John Rolfe. Furthermore, who of the English/Albion would want to glorify the unseemly truth relating to Pocahontas, Captain John Smith and John Rolfe? Especially now when modern history has painted such a beautiful picture, a story told with such passionate respect now today, that the colonization and the overthrow of the Moorish Almoracan Empire of the West is complete. The historians would only have need to color the record. With all this vital history hidden in a shallow grave, who of the benefactors would send or give any true history to the disinherited and enslaved Moorish Almoracan children? After all, English control the schools too. And the child-minded black people believe that their Roman conquerors are the white nation, quote unquote. One must often think that conquering a long-established people, though a long struggle, just should not have been so easy. Okay, ancillary. Question. What is the definitive meaning of Maghrib al-Aqsa?
Northwestern Maxim?
Answer. Maghrib al-Aqsa means Morocco, the most extreme west. And I guess I could interject that the other two, because if it's the most extreme west, and I guess from my studies thus far, you have Maghrib al-Awal and Maghrib al-Landa. So one is west, one is more west, and one is furthest west, which we are the furthest west. Okay. Question.
The across the river.
Yes, the Ibri,
Yeah.
as we are. Question. How did the Moors of Maghrib al-Aqsa come to be called by the prima facie pseudonym Indians? Answer. The Aboriginal Moors of Maghreb al-Aqsa were plausibly given the assumptive nom de guerre Indian, inclusive of other misnomers, by the alien, or alien, and sadistic inquisitionists from Europe. The invocation of the moniker Indian, quote unquote, is attributed mainly to the loyal servant and tyrannical sociopath of the Inquisition, bishopric Cristofero Colombo. Cristofero Colombo, or Christopher Colombo with a R, commonly known as Christopher Columbus, kept notes and records. You're right, Brother Todd. It don't matter what they do, they're gonna write it down, right? Kept notes and records as required by the Inquisitionists, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Many of these may be found in the shipping logs. Colombo wrote to the Exchequer. Oh, no, you didn't. Colombo wrote to the Exchequer, Louis de Saint-Angel, or Louis de Saint-Angel, for those that want to know how it's spelled, explaining his voyage and the way he took possession of the new lands he found in what he called the Indies. Cristofero Colombo initiated his pilferage, which is stealing for those of us who've done loss prevention. Christopher Colombo initiated his pilferage voyage for the bishopric with the financial and material supports of the administrators of the Inquisition. He was seeking to find a western sea route to the source of the Moors' spices and other fineries known to be a primal part of Moorish culture and heritage. Can I stop right there and just say what's on my head? This is no different than, okay. His intent was pilferaging. So that's the same when policy enforcement put on a uniform every morning, their intent is to pilferage.
Of New York. Is it any secret? So that people won't look at what their origin is?
I mean, it's so clear though. Like when you see this, it's clear.
Why do they think they call it that? Why do they think they say some persons branded black have the brains of a monkey?
Mike.
Oh, the mic is right, I think there.
That bell curve?
Aria, mic for Brother Taj. Is it there? Is it up here? Oh, you know what? I'm loud and wrong.
Remember a few years back, there was controversy about one of the books that Europeans wrote called The Bell Curve. Okay. And they made reference to the unwillingness or incapacity of persons called black to think, to use basic elemental thinking. Yes. It is based on what you just said. Yeah. You can put doo-doo on their nose and they'll say it's something else because they believe things that have nothing to do with reality. Then we get insulted for them telling the truth. It's so obvious. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that's why you say, like, no matter what, when we're sharing this information, you gotta allow people their dignity.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So continuing, where it says, I had stopped where it was talking about the sea roots and the spices, right? So here we go. This search, and again, this is from a woman called Rebecca, Divisions in the Moorish Nation by Brother Taj Tarik Bey. This search of a western sea route had much to do with the fact that the Moors had a long-standing fortress on Calpe, or Calpe, C-A-L-P-E, Calpe, which is known in modern times as the Rock of Gibraltar. Gibraltar is a corruption of the Arabic Gebral al-Tariq, which means mountain or hill of Tariq. Tariq was a Moorish general or Qazi. Some would say Ghazi as well, correct? Therefore, the European Inquisitionists, exploiters, sought another route to Hindustan. The Hindustani were also referred to as Mohammedans. They were known or assumed to be in Hindustan. It must, I didn't read that right, they were known or assumed to be in Hindustan. It must be noted that Hindustan was believed to be India or thereabouts, and certainly he initially believed that he'd more or less found it, and certainly that's how the name Indies, quote unquote, got attached to the modern West Indies, and the name Indians, quote unquote, to Native Americans. The following is an excerpt from Cristoforo Colombo's letter in the year 1493 and sent to the Exchequer, Louis de Saint-Angel, recording his observations, proclamations, and claims. Why is he writing to the Exchequer? Not why, but you know, because we know what debtor's prison is. So it's, okay, anyway. The eternal and almighty God, our Lord, it is who gives to all who walk in his way victory over things apparently impossible, and in this case, signally or signally. So, because although these lands had been imagined and talked of before they were seen, most men listen incredulously to what, sorry, did I pronounce that wrong? Come on, help me out if I did. Incredulously, right? Incredulously to what was thought to be but an idle tale. But our Redeemer has given victory to our most illustrious King and Queen, and to their kingdoms rendered famous by this glorious event, at which all Christendom should rejoice, celebrating it with great festivities and solemn thanksgivings to the Holy Trinity, with fervent prayers for the high distinction that will accrue to them from turning so many people to our holy faith, and also from the temporal benefits that not only Spain but all Christian nations will obtain. Thus I record. What has happened in a brief note written on board the Caravel off the Canary Isles on the 15th of September, 1493. Quote, as I know that you will be pleased at the great victory with which our Lord has crowned my voyage, I write this to you, from which you will learn how in 33 days I passed from the Canary Islands to the Indies with the fleet which the most illustrious King and Queen, our sovereigns, gave to me. And there I found very many islands filled with people. I just wanted to stop right. I don't know. Somebody told me to stop right there. Filled with people. This is what he's saying after he said, hold on, I just want to go back. Although these lands had been imagined and talked about. Before they were seen. But then later on it says, I passed from the Canary Islands to the Indies with the fleet which the most illustrious can and there I found very many islands filled. Not like halfway filled or half empty, half like, wow. With people, innumerable at that. Okay. So that takes you now to the 1828 definition of Noah Webster's dictionary. Yes, Islam.
Sister T.S. Phyllis is here.
Yes.
And at that point, we had a conversation about their island. She and
Microphone.
Sister Erica. We had a conversation, yesterday, I believe, about, with you and Sister Eartha, about your island. And can you share, okay, Sister Eartha, can you share, because she's a 5th generation empress.
I'll do it.
Yeah,
I'll do it.
because it ties in with what you're reading and it's relevant because, they lived it.
Actually, what the most beautiful thing is that we are here from Roatan, which is the Bay Islands of the Caribbean and the Atlantic. Those Bay Islands is 36 miles off the coast mainland of Honduras, currently under the sovereignty of Honduras through Treaty of 1816 between Queen Victoria and Honduras. But how did that happen? That had to do with the fact that Belize was on the table, so it was kind of a flip. You get it? Okay. On this beautiful island, from what you just read, is an affirmation and confirmation. We were already there. We were already there. And what's most beautiful is that there is now, the history is coming up like all over the world. We were already here. And I have the honor and privilege of being currently the Goodwill Ambassador of this island. And I invite each of you to come and enjoy the island. It's a Western Caribbean island that you can go on Carnival Cruise and Norwegian and other private cruise lines to come and stop on the island and see how beautiful it is. I'm making a social tourism plug because social tourism allows us to exchange like this. Like I've come to you. My mayor said one day, why haven't you left to Africa? Because I was assigned to the continent of Africa. And I said, because I am in Africa, so I will do my work in this region. So I invite you to come and enjoy. And yes, we have been arduously and excitedly inviting people to come to the island because it is part of the empire. It is part, the history makes it part of the empire. The clock in Comayagua makes me so excited to have reconnected. It's also where I am natively from. But I'm actually natively from there. Get it? Isn't that beautiful? And I think the most revealing to me about it all is that it actually connects all the native Bay Islanders and other islanders to the actual empire, but not only historically, but epigenetically. Okay? And I say this in this context. I was conceived there and born here. But from the time I was able to reason, I used to always ask my mama to take me home. Because those 7 months in gestation, I connected genetically to the region. Which means that we are all connected to the empire. Right? So I introduce myself again. I am from Central America. And I am traveling with the sister from Central America, Eartha. And I'll just keep it as Eartha. Because if you look at the news, there's a lot going on. The element right now in that region is fire. So I need you all to mentally cool down the airwaves with your mind because thought travels faster than the speed of light. So if y'all can take a moment right now to just shift the energy of fire and cool the region down on our behalf so that we can actually have a home to go to.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Good luck.
thank you.
I wanted you to also share about the fact that your islands were the last two to be discovered, and what they are remnant of.
Oh, so, you know, researchers come all the time. And it's funny because Brother Bey said earlier, and I caught it, I was sitting on a computer and I said, wow, the scholars know. They know. So I'm gonna give you a little anecdote. When our brothers violate the corporate structure, there is a question that's asked when they are sent back and relocated back. Where are they to go? Are they to go to that region or are they to go to London? Just want that out there, because that's a curiosity for me still, you know? You reminded me today when we were speaking of the beauty of our connection. There's something going on here. Brother came in today saying that nothing is by accident. I am not here by accident. We are not here by accident. We all had a divine appointment. So I also want to inform you that we are in the Western Caribbean. We have not been uncovered yet. They thought we got discovered. You got that? But we have uncovered in our journeys how profoundly beautiful our legacy is. So let us continue to amplify the thought vibrations founded on 578 hertz.
Yeah.
You hear that? That's traveling faster than the speed of light, and we are all connected at this moment. And the reconnection is really not a reconnection of anything else but our minds and our hearts in divine alignment with the planet. So there's a lot of movement going on. Like I wanted to go home, I am home.
All right.
Yes, mother.
What I really wanted my sister to tell you, but she told you what she wanted to tell you, which is good,
It's the air.
It's the air, but I remember what she said. It made me Sister Erta could come up and tell us. But remember when you said to me that those two islands, the last two islands to be discovered, is where you were, that they had discovered.
From Atlanta.
That's what, and that you are a remnant from. Okay.
I'm going to tell you, yes. There was this European that came to the island with all his map research, and what he was able to write about was that those three islands, what was remained from the sinking of Atlantis.
Oh, yes.
And it's not a novelty. A lot of us have known that. I heard agreement here. But can you imagine Atlantis is actually rising?
Yes.
But it's rising within us.
Yes.
That is the piece that brings us together. That is what eliminates the illusion of separation.
Yes.
Because it's happening. The ancestors are here. We are the ancient ones, remember that? We are the ancient ones.
Yes.
We are who we have been waiting to come save us. It's us.
Yes. Thank you.
Wow. My mother, Naila, I had about 3 years ago today, I was telling you, I'm gonna be brief. But by things not happening by chance, and Brother Taj, I know you already know, you know what I'm saying? So, this would be my matrilineal mother's solar return, if she were still here. But on this day was when I talked to my patrilineal mother, who gifted me my first fez that had a gold tassel, so that's why I wear it, right? She told me some names to research. And I let her know that, you know, my mother's mother was from the Accomack County Corporation, from near there,
Yeah.
Virginia.
Yeah.
Come to find out, my patrilineal side is from there too, because when I was talking to my father's mother, she said the same area. And when you